Greetings, everyone. Your cartoonist pal Stan here with another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, show that I am doing to celebrate the fact that 2024 is the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons and the hobby of tabletop role playing. It all started 50 years ago. Not this week, but 50 years ago this year. And I'm celebrating with this show where I'm interviewing folks that I have had the good fortune to know and work with and interact with socially, who have also worked on the game. I don't know if you're watching this, why you wouldn't know this, but in case you didn't know, I worked on Dungeons and Dragons at TSR when it was still in Lake Geneva, and then I came out to Wizards of the Coast in Seattle and worked there some more. And after I separated from Wizards of the Coast, I've been doing it off and on freelancing. So I've been involved between playing and working, and I started playing back in 1979. So 45 of the 50 years, Dungeons and Dragons has been a part of my life. I'm just saying. And a lot of my guests have been involved that long and longer. If you've watched any of the previous shows, you'd know that. I'm not saying you need to go back and watch them, but in fact, right now it's kind of tough. But here's some big news: my YouTube channel is not coming back in its previous form, but I'm working on a new one, and that will come live sometime relatively soon. Hello, Craig. Thank you for joining us. And I say us because my guest this week is Scott Douglas, who is a former network coordinator for the RPGA and a lot more. And I'm going to let him tell you most of his story because I always get those kind of details wrong. You know someone, you like them, and you don't remember their resume because you're too busy hanging out. So let's hang out. Hello, Scott Douglas. Thank you for
Hey,
joining me.
how are you doing, Stan?
I'm
Good to see you, man.
doing good. Good to see you too. You are still in Lake Geneva, or I mean, after having gone a lot of different places in between, you are currently in Lake Geneva.
I can't afford to live in Lake Geneva, Stan. But
Neither could I. I lived in Delavan.
Eric Garland Gygax Garland just moved back to Lake Geneva, which is a joy. It's very cool that they are raising their children in the same school district that Heidi was raised in. That's very very cool.
Nice.
But yeah, I live in the Poplar Grove, which is towards Rockford, so a little
Okay.
southwest of Lake Geneva. I don't have the same problem getting up and down the street that people in Lake Geneva do on a
Right.
Saturday afternoon.
Right.
It's quite busy there. So
That's when I lived there, and this has come up in a lot of the conversations on this show. That in summertime, no one went into Lake Geneva, the town, because it was too busy. But
yeah.
we, most of us, lived in Delavan or Darien or
Lake Como. Yeah, Lake Como was
Williams
good.
Bay.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's all that counts as Lake Geneva. It's
Jim
all
lived in Elkhorn for many, many,
yeah,
many, many
yeah.
years. So I mean, except for the time he was teaching, he was always in Elkhorn. So
So, uh, how badly did I do in describing who you were?
well, if once I start talking, I won't stop. So you're going to have to, knock me off at some point. But my story with D&D started with my little brother Marty. So Marty played Dungeons and Dragons in college at University of Central Oklahoma, and where he was studying. He was in a fraternity, and they had a really good D&D group, and he loved it. And so he brought it to some of us, some of his friends, and me included. And
And
uh,
about when is this? What?
this would have been he started playing, I would say, in 1981, 1982.
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, yeah, because Marty, yeah, he wouldn't have started before 1980. But I didn't start until it was Memorial Day of 1983. We were driving back from a family reunion, and Marty gave me a. I'm driving, and Marty gives me a 2 hour introduction to the D&D game, and then runs me through a solo adventure when we get home. And so I always run people through the same solo adventure, which is, you're in the dark, you have no idea what you're doing. What are you going to do? And
Yeah.
for 5 minutes they've got to feel it out. What are those options? And they have to start thinking in that vocabulary. And we speak a different vocabulary now than we did 40 years ago. More
Yeah.
game related now. It's all technical,
Yeah.
tanking, all the kind of terms that you hear people use, but you didn't have those terms back then. You had books. You had Sword of Shannara. You had Lord of the Rings, and my brother's favorite was the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, Lord Foul's Bane, Illerth
Yeah,
War.
yeah.
Oh man, those books are good because they take you to a place that you didn't expect Tolkien would have envisioned. You know,
That's
but
for
as well thought of, and maybe not as highly thought, but brilliantly conceived, and there are real issues about what human beings go through, and that's what the games we play are about. We seem to think about high adventure, and in America they're about acquisition of stuff. I mean, that's where my experience with Dungeons and Dragons turned south is that American Dungeons and Dragons players don't play like heroic adventurers. They play like collectors and folks with unbelievable amounts of available storage. So,
it's the reason
I have
why
3 storage places myself, and no portable hole is going to solve that problem for me. So,
it's the reason why the term murder hobo has come to be thrown around in our circles.
we didn't have anybody to play with in Oklahoma City. We didn't have a lot of connected gaming at the time, and so we put on some ourselves, some of which was pretty average, and then went up to Gen Con my very first time in '88. Gen Con Origins. Went by myself. I stayed in the dorms. University of Wisconsin Milwaukee was great
Hmm.
because it was very connected vibe. Everybody was having a great time. They were there. I mean, everybody was there at the convention every second of every moment of the day. And we didn't have like phones to distract us, so we were all standing in line and making friends. It was like we didn't know any better.
Yeah.
So yeah, by the second Gen Con, that was for me '89. I went with Donald Dennis. We drove his brown Cadillac, or he drove it, and I sat there and enjoyed it. And then this third year, we had 4 of us going into Hugo with a clamshell roof rack. This is true. 4 of us in Hugo driving from Oklahoma City to Gen Con. Yeah, and Donald will vouch for that. It's a true story. Reed Little is on YouTube somewhere. He can tell you as well. So, but no. So we went, and I really got joined RPGA that year, and the network was a very different vibe from the other gaming groups I'd been involved with because it was sort of a competition, but it wasn't a competition about winning the round or achieving an objective. It was kind of like who could be the biggest show off in the round and get the most votes from the other players. And that was weighted, and
Yeah.
people who are unduly, taking attention, they didn't get voted as well. But it was just a system that made sense, and we all agreed to it. And so it was a non-competitive kind of competitive thing, and it was fun to be in an advancing round because you knew that the next players you're going to play with were better than the ones that were in the prelim.
Right.
And
Hold
then
on.
you get to the final. Go.
Let's pause here. You've jumped
Yeah,
over some interesting stuff that I'd like you to talk a little more
please.
about
No,
before.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So when you started in Oklahoma City, or when you were playing, what was your group like? Who were you playing with?
Theater friends,
Yeah.
people that we'd done summer stock theater with. So, and some of them, because they were really good actors, made the game very exciting. I mentioned this to Craig, who's on our chat this evening. Craig Patillo, one of my friends,
Right.
and co-writer of this game I'm working with. We were in this adventure in which our friend Tim Leftwich was holding a bridge with a bunch of bandits, and we were all first level characters, and we were terrified because of Tim's tone of voice. He had us convinced that these bandits were just going to just tear us a new orifice of some kind, and it was great role playing, and it was so much fun because I remember that in retrospect we weren't in any real danger, except unless my brother was rolling a game in which he would kill us all because we shouldn't be taking things so lightly. But Marty was a really big justice kind of social justice kind of guy in terms of the way that the game played. Everything was balance.
Yeah. Now it's interesting, and this is something that's come up a lot too in the different conversations. That because D&D has its origins in wargaming, that's one through line of people who came into the game and have that as the lens that they saw it through.
Right.
But
It's in
then
my genetics, but it's not my
Right,
main
right. But
reason.
then there's other people, uh, like like theater people, like me. I came into the game through thinking of, through Tolkien, through fiction, through literature, and thinking of it as a storytelling game rather than a combat-y game. Despite the fact that all the rules were around combat, what was intriguing to me, what pulled me in, was the storytelling aspect and the role playing aspect, like you were saying, like what you what you say at the table could change as a GM would
Yeah,
change everyone's reaction. The
I
numbers are the
agree.
same.
Marty liked to play a very level-headed game, and so he would give you the Axe of the Dwarvish Lords, but all of a sudden you smelled like the worst thing on earth, and you can't lift anything. All these major disadvantages to advantages. He liked game balance, and if you were going to give you something really good, there was a price to be paid for it, and because the game is not about gathering stuff and putting it in your tote. That's what Americans do every day. And I'm not complaining. I'm not saying we've got to, I'm just saying that that's not what high adventure is about. That's certainly not what Frodo and Sam did, you know. They took
Right.
every risk, and at no point did they think they were going to get out of it. At no point did they think they were going to get out of it. And they were, you know, they were trying to be good. They were trying to evoke the story was trying to evoke their nature, and a good game does the same thing. Marty's games did that. Made me feel like, you know, we were noble in spirit, that we were trying to do something that was worth doing.
Right.
So yeah,
So
we've
when you first
start talking
came
about my
up,
brother at some point because it's a very important figure in my life. My little brother.
yeah. When you first came up to Gen Con, um, was that was that the first time? I'm not sure it even happened, but did you run into people who did not have that view of the game, who were playing it from the more give us our stuff and that's all it's about, is what can I kill and what can I take? Group?
No, the folks in Oklahoma City, it was all about the adventure. Against the people I knew, and there were some folks that were all power gamers, and that was fine. And I ran into Arduin Grimoire for the first time when I was a little kid. I was like, my gosh, 1,000 level character? How does that even work? You know. But the concept was, oh, there are limits that I've put in this in my mind that are outside of, you know. There's a game other than AD&D. What is that? You know. So, but I had friends that were involved in other activities. Donald Dennis, very into Call of Cthulhu,
Mm,
and I mean he is a wonderful Call of Cthulhu. He's a guy that really can scare you, you know, because he's read all the books and he knows all the words and knows how to use them, so knows how not to use them. But you know, we had a lot of people that were just had a good time pretending at the table, and the experience I brought back from Gen Con was that the pretending was the best part of the experience. It was the vanishing, it was the going vanishing into the story for a little while was the great part of the thing. And I talk to young players these days, and the handles they have on the game, the vocabulary they use in the game is very game related. You know, they use technical terms that as if a first person shooter term or a game. We didn't have those background, so the rules, the words that we used were words out of literature. You know, or words out of the movies that we liked, and there weren't as many then as, I mean, when Lady Hawk came around, I was like, oh, finally, there's a
yeah.
really good sword and sorcery movie. You know. So there are others. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, Excalibur and other thing, really great films. But I remember Lady Hawk had the joy of Dungeons and Dragons to it.
I remember when Ed Stark was on a number of episodes ago.
Ed's
We were
awesome.
talking
He's a
about
love sucker.
how it when you it being a fantasy and sci-fi fan in the '70s, late '70s and early '80s meant going to see the whatever came out, and mostly it was not that good. But
It
you
was not good
went
at all.
a couple of times so that they'd make the next one next year. Because if no
Yeah,
one showed up, they'd just stop making them. And every once in a while, you'd get a Lady Hawk, right?
yeah.
Which,
Or a Dark Star.
yeah,
You know, it's something you didn't expect. It's like, oh, he took it to a different level.
yeah,
And what happened to the guy with Dark Star? He writes Aliens, so or writes the first Alien screenplay. No mistake. These are crazy. We work with some crazy people, Stan, and this is a good thing because I was talking to a Gygax the other day. I was actually talking to Heidi, and we were talking about the role playing, the nature of the role playing game, and we're in a state where we can imagine things that were unimaginable before. We we and I'm not making a big claim like, oh, we can do magical things, but I'm saying that human being has been limited to what was literally in front of them for a long period of time. Personal simulation between you and I was not even on the radar. It was, we
Right.
play cowboys and Indians, bang bang. We've got this technology now. We haven't begun to pry it open. Not even begun to pry
Yeah.
open role playing games. So yeah, don't get me started about the use of role playing games in nursing homes, because I think that's a real opportunity
Maybe I
for
will, but
folks
not.
to stay engaged.
All right. I'm going to while we continue to talk, I'm going to switch over to this view where I'm going to
Ooh, I love
be
that picture.
start working on my cartoon homage to this was Larry Elmore's cover painting for the Forgotten Realms book of Lairs, which
Book of Lairs.
came out in 1994.
REF3, I think.
I think you're right. Um, all right. So here's an interesting thing. So when I was growing up, and I first heard of the RPGA by reading about it in Dragon magazine. I didn't really understand why in the world I'd want to do that, because role playing was just I played with my group at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't need an organ. They offered nothing that supported that. It wasn't until I started going to conventions that I started to understand what um, what the RPG held and what doors it unlocked that it didn't before. So before we get into your work working on it, when you got to those early Gen Cons and you, as you say, you joined the RPGA, uh, tell us a little bit about
I'll tell you
what
something that happened to me the very first time I sat in front of an RPGA round as a player. They had a marshaling system, and so if you go to Gen Con these days, you go to the Lucas Stadium, and you might sit in the stadium seats where the players might sit. Well, back in at Gen Con in Milwaukee, we had a hall called Bruce Hall where the RPGA games were run. Is a huge hockey arena with stadium seats, 12, I think 5,000 people could sit there, but it gave us a place for seating. So when we wanted to seat a bunch of RPGA players, we would put the benefit in this section, and the AD&D Open in this section, and the Living City Round in this section. And so all the players that were registered and had their tickets would sit there in the section, and the marshal would come along and find a game master that we had sitting in their own section and hook them up with six players and send them to table 171, and then six players and send them to 173, and then we would be able to marshal 1,000 players in like 10-15 minutes to tables in the arena. So within a few minutes, everybody's got their books and they're sitting down at a table, and all of a sudden 1,000 people are playing games off the same. It was amazing. The marshaling strategy was, you didn't these days, if you go to tabletop and sign up for a game, say for a game at Gary Con, I know who's going to be at that table because that's the way tabletop works. I can tell you exactly which people are going to be at that table because they purchased the tickets. There was such a random aspect to the marshaling way of tabling big groups of gamers at Gen Con that I thought was amazing and sort of random. And it put the game masters into an awesome situation where they had to wing it with the players they had. They not
right.
everybody was really good, or some people were like me, yak too much. So
But I
uh,
mean, Gen Con also had that. Even back then, you could buy your tickets for games. In fact, the first
no
couple,
question,
yeah,
yeah.
the RPGA was doing something different,
We were
right?
doing something different because we were running, let's just say that the RPGA was running 17 tournament rounds at Gen Con, let's just say. Well, we might run 1,500 to 1,700 people through some of those rounds. So that means we have to have game masters for all those people. And those people are volunteers, and we've got to get those ahead of time. And those people have got to be qualified, that is to say, good enough to sit in front of an RPGA table. And it was a little intimidating the first time I ran around, but I found that running a pre-generated round with the RPGA, I know that Gene and Skip and the folks there had cleared the round and knew that it was going to be worth playing, most RPGA judges, by the time I left, the people I knew, they could sit down cold with a round and make it hysterical in just 30, 40 minutes, because they had some experience with this improvisation. They felt very comfortable with it. Don Bingle, Jay Tummelson. These are people. Jay Tummelson was the most highly ranked judge at RPGA when I was there. Don Bingle was the highest ranked player when I was there. And these are amazing gamers. I mean, very funny people and highly competent, gamers. So, but
So
then there are people who
let's
just came along and played one or two games. But what happened with us is that we enjoyed the quality of the game so much, Donald and I, is that we brought them back to Oklahoma City. So we are running RPGA games with our home group or with the local conventions, and that got to be a thing. Like they really appreciated that we could bring a gaming guest like Ed Greenwood in to SoonerCon in 1995, I think, 1994. And Ed, of course, was an awesome guest, as he always is. And he ran a wonderful charity game that all the players, were happy to sit at that table. And but we were able to bring a little bit of that Gen Con magic to Oklahoma City, and I kept going. Every year I'd go to Gen Con. So it was like 5 or 6 years in a row. And I gradually, as people dropped out, I gradually promoted myself to a higher position of whatever. I think I was marshaling and coordinating for a while, and then I started helping at HQ, and I got into a round at HQ. I don't think I've ever told this story. Jean Raby ran a game in HQ because she couldn't get out of she was running the RPGA Network at the time. This would have been 90, 91. There was running a Living City round. And people at HQ didn't get a chance to play in any games because they were busy. And Jean never got a chance to run any games because she was busy. But if she ran a game in HQ, then, well, that was kind of fun. And I got a chance to sit in on it. And we had a blast. And I ran a character who was a cleric of Tear, Tear, and the concept was he wanted to take all the sorrow in the world on himself. And so when they put me into a role-playing situation where I had to sing, my character started singing the blues. I can't explain it. It just happened, but it was just so in the moment, and it was just exactly what the character needed to do at the time, and the players were cracking up. And I think at that point, Gene and I'm trying to remember, Cheryl Freck, who was running HQ for Gene at the time. I think they looked at me and said, "Okay, he's a real guy. He's a player. He's here serious." And it was like I was having so much fun, and I think that's what they saw, is that I was, and I think the beginning of my starting to work at RPGA headquarters was that there was this old guy sitting at the table in front of RPGA headquarters and asked me to sit down and help him answer questions as people came up. I had just become a member, and so I didn't know that. So I sat and talked to this guy for about a half hour, an hour, and he had to go over to the auction. It turned out that was Frank Menser. And by the
Mhm.
time he left, I was running the front door at RPGA HQ. So, and this would have been Gen Con 1990, my very first year to pay any real close attention to the RPGA other than just playing in the rounds. So I've been very fortunate the people I ran into, because Frank is just a wonderful man, and as we've gotten to know each other over he was the very first RPGA coordinator, so we all looked up to the guy who brought all this stuff together. And the RPGA Network was in fact a tournament organization, but there were a lot of other things that they had. It was a newsletter, and we eventually had a living these ongoing campaigns, which were very time consuming for HQ, and became a central issue of um, my working at TSR when I came up there. We had to certify people's characters because people were bringing characters that they couldn't possibly have gotten to these rounds.
Okay,
The
so
Living City is one of those interesting games in which um, we had grand ideas of a whole bunch of people playing in this grand tournament, and we let the individual game masters run the rounds. But the game masters also have friends, and they also want to run their own characters in these rounds, and they also have conventions, and so they're different. Um, there's different gravity pulling, and as a result, it made it very complicated for the RPGA to run a network, because it's very complicated for an individual network, an individual campaign to be well run, but to maintain a network that involves as many as 4,000, 5,000 characters, which I think we had registered at the time that I left TSR, which was Christmas of '96. So, and then of course there were more after that, but
Right, but so
it's
time out again. You have
go.
once again jumped through a bunch of stuff, which I understand exactly what you're talking about. There's a lot of
Tell
people out there. The RPGA now hasn't been around for
2008.
for
Yeah,
16 years.
yeah.
So, um, can you just give a primer
Sure.
on a bunch of those things that you were just talking about?
Early on, after the creation of the AD&D game, Gary asked Frank Menser to put together a club utilizing a lot of the people that they'd been gathering at Gen Con and these other smaller events. Um, and they assembled a group called the RPGA Network, and it was the charter membership was, I think, about 600 people.
Yeah. Now,
And
again, just for people who can't figure this out, that's a role playing game association. So,
Thank you. Yeah, the Role Playing Game Association trademark, actually, or RPGA and network was always added because it was about the group of people, not the association. It was the network that made it all happen. So yeah, we ran tournaments, and we assisted Gen Con in these ways and other conventions, because other conventions found this structure of being able to muster a lot of players in a hurry. All I need is one copy of a round and a photocopier and 60 judges, and all of a sudden I can satisfy, 360 players instantly.
all right. Again,
So
just for folks that don't know, what's the difference between an adventure and a round?
thank you. Yeah, a pre-generated. What we were talking. That was something else I should have added. But an adventure
Okay,
would
that's
be.
why I'm the host.
Yeah, thanks. I would call an adventure the whole meal, the whole meal. But if I was going to run a tournament at a convention, that might be a 3-round tournament in which there are 3 stages. You get to the finals, or it might be a single game. And instead of rolling up your own characters, we were using something. We was very popular pre-generated characters in a tournament round. That makes it a little easier for the judges to help determine who's doing a really good job role playing. If you're seeing, 150 Kens and 150 Barbies, it's helpful to it is able to help figure out how the cream rises to the top in those role playing situations. But and you do it in a single round, 6 players and one game master sitting around a table once every 4 hours. And that 4 hours is like really rigid. I mean, because in my very first year at Gen Con, I showed up at 8 in the morning. I gamed 4 straight slots until midnight, went home, or went to my bed, got up, was there at 8 in the morning. I wasn't going to let a moment of that get me pass me by. But the 4 hour slots is something that the 4 hour time period, which is now common or established in Gen Con, is because that was the amount of time it took to get a round seated, played, and then people moving on to the next tournament round. So
Okay.
tournament round and adventure. An adventure just talks about the whole the process, the whole process of the adventure. But the round is the 4 hour game slot. How much you're supposed to accomplish inside of the 4 hour game slot.
So one of the things that's interesting, again, that I don't think is necessarily obvious to people that haven't been in it, is that when we think of adventures now, they are a a situation, and you're bringing your characters and you just solve it. It doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
These tournaments very often would have goals that you would be told that you
Oh
first of
yeah.
all, as you say, everyone was you didn't bring your own character. You had a pre-generated character, which would have personality and goals.
You had
And
30 minutes to internalize that before you're ready to play. So after you got your character, you give you 30 minutes to read your character sheet It also had interactions with the other characters, and then you'd start the round, and then you'd have to finish about 10 minutes before the round or 15 minutes before the end of the time period, that is to say, because someone like me would come along and try to whisk you out of your table so we could get the next group seated.
Right. And then, so you'd have, uh, I mean, one of the things I always found fascinating about the RPGA tournaments was the number of times that people had, they literally had goals of you want this to happen during the adventure sometime, and no one
Mm-hmm.
else really need ever know it until the scoring round at the end of where they find out, did you do this, did you do that, and you find out
Mm-hmm.
my goal was to do that. Oh, that's why you kept saying that all through the 4 hours.
Right, and the role playing part of it, at the end of an RPGA tournament, it always concluded with the player voting. So the player had these little voting sheets, and the player got to vote for the top four players in their opinion, and then how they ranked the judge in terms of various criteria. And the judge had a chance to make their own evaluation, and then it was sort of a weighted vote. The judge's vote counted twice when it came to determining the best in the round, but then you added up the numbers, and then those numbers not only helped us promote and give a prize at the venue at the convention, but that information, that packet, got sent into HQ where Gene Raby or Judy Mueller or one of our nice Cork people would enter all that information into the database so that we would have ranked players. So the player who's played a lot more rounds and done well in those rounds is going to be a master player or a grand master player or a paragon player, or I'm not sure what goes past Paragon, but the Paragons, the people I know are Paragons, are just the most amazing role players you'll ever sit down with.
um, yeah, so that's, I mean, I think later in our conversation, I want to come back to this because it's just a thing that doesn't exist so much anymore in for all that gaming has grown in the last, particularly the last 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
That is an aspect of it that isn't around anymore.
Can I give you a reason why I agree with you? When you go into a pre-generated round, you have your spells, they're your character, you've got your magic items and all that stuff. And if you're if you know that you're going to have to read your character sheet for a half hour, then you only have like 3 hours and 15 minutes to play. You're going to use every item on that character sheet. You're not going to leave one out, right? You're going to use every scroll you've got. You're going to use every potion you've got, because you got to figure that the author of the round gave those to you on purpose,
Right?
right? There's a certain amount of randomness to it, but the authors had a chance to style their characters to the adventure quite um, elegantly. I mean, and intricately. And some of the writers, who many of became people like Tom Brusa, who actually wrote professionally for TSR. The adventures are so well thought out and so imaginative. I played a round written by well, the names are escaping me right now, but it was a round in which the characters were all origami uh, figures.
Yeah. There were some really super creative things, which I think is probably a secondary discussion. But picking up on what you said, one of the things that I found playing an RPGA module, playing at home, you wanted to manage your resources. You didn't want to use
Yes.
this round,
Don't have that
this
problem in a
week.
pre-gen.
You might need it a week, a month, 6 months from now. But when you
Exactly.
got into, if there was something kind of what you said, if there's something on your character sheet in an RPGA module, use it because you only got 4 hours. So a
Yeah,
lot
and
of
once the
these,
round is over, you've lost your opportunity to use
right,
that item. So
right.
just use it. You know,
There's a
who
lot of
knows what's
really
going to
cool
happen?
magical items and other equipment and gear situations that at home you would never. Well, not you
Right.
would never. You would save it for just the right moment.
For
This
your
was a
home
chance to.
campaign, you might do that. But I mean, in conventions, it's usually so competitive, people want to win. But at an RPGA round, it became really more of a festival of who can crack each other up more than somebody else can. And there were people who were like watch me people like me, or like, I want to win the round, so I'm going to be the most dramatic person, whatever. But people who are real annoying, those people got downvoted as well. So the system worked itself out because we were counting on human beings to evaluate in a human being sort of way. And it wasn't the whole thing wasn't a big deal. I mean, you'd come out of a round, pretty much people knew who was the best player in the round. I mean, and it wasn't that's not a when I say best, that makes it sound so subjective. Um, but who was the most accomplished role player in the room? If you sit at a table with Linda Bingle and you've never played with Linda Bingle before, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is like playing with Glenn Close, or playing with a very famous actress. Because they're so relaxed in their role play. They can improvise so well, and they're so experienced in the many different genres of play. And it's really cool to see someone like that operate, because um, they are on a different level than you and I, Stan, and we're okay. But man, I see some of those people, some of those players at the table, and it's Dewey Frack. I mean, you just crack me
Right.
up over and over again. He's such a good role player. It's all in character. It's not just toss off, make people laugh stuff. It's all to advance the story. It's when you're playing with, if you're on a stage and you're doing a play, when you got better actors around you, you're going to have a lot more fun.
Right.
And that's what it felt like at RPGA. I haven't felt like that in a long time at a game, because there was a freedom of confidence, of knowing that the time you spent was not wasted. That the next round you got in was going to be really good. And as a person who came up to work at TSR, as the RPGA Network coordinator after Gene Raby became a famous novelist, I felt, well, first it was a big shoes to step into, because Skip and Gene had been doing a pretty good job running the network before I got there. But what was going on was the ongoing campaign, the Living City aspect of our tournament program was taking so much of our time. And plus, we're trying to be a part of the public relations department for TSR. And that was 1995 was the year Ken Whitman sent a bunch of us out to conventions every weekend. And it sounds really cool. And in retrospect, yeah, I had a great time, but I also went like 7 weekends without a day off. So,
Right.
I
All right.
like
So
Gen Con, but I was
let's
exhausted
again
at the end of
take
that
a half
convention.
step back on this. And so, how is it that you came to join TSR?
I had just graduated college with my teaching degree and was working at a science museum in Oklahoma City. Was the happiest man you'd ever met in your entire life. My children loved to come to my job. It was just awesome. And then I got this call out of the blue from Gene Raby, who said, I want to, write novels, and I'd like to step off being network coordinator. You are one of the people I thought about recommending for the job, and would you like to come up for an interview? And I talked to my boss, the education director at the science center, and she says, "Well, Scott, you got to take the interview. You got to go." And so
That's a good boss.
well, I walked out of that place crying. I mean, it was Beth Bussey. She told me my job as a science instructor was to infect the children with my love of learning. I love Beth because she when she just got right to the heart of it. When you're trying to get kids excited about science, you got to get right past the words and the concepts. You got to get them into it. You got to get them feeling it. So anyway, I get to do that for a living now. That's what I do when I'm not playing games. Is I do science presentations for
Mm.
libraries and schools all over the country. So I'm very fortunate when I get a chance to go all over the country. I'm happy when I get a chance to do Chicago Public Library, like I am this summer. So
All right. So she invited
where
you up
were we?
to be have the interview. How did
Well, I
that go?
got the interview. So I came up and got the interview, and apparently I did real well because the public relations guy's secretary liked me, so I got the job. And then she left, so it was like, geez, my one connection in Crystal Palace, and she left. So I came up to work for TSR in January of 1995. We had gone to Winter Fantasy just before that, which was a convention at the time was being held in Milwaukee. Baldwin Games still runs Winter Fantasy in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I think in February these days.
That's
But
great.
we came up to Winter Fantasy and then never left. Went back to Lake Geneva and stayed with the Wisconsin regional director, and who was very nice to allow me to stay with him, and Bill Corey, and a friend of Gene Raby's. And Gene and Bruce were very kind as well. When I got up there, I didn't know anybody, and then um, uh, uh, I was working with Kevin Melka and Dave Gross running the Polyhedron.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really great magazine. And
All
as I
right, so
look back,
Polyhedron, I was about to say before you went off,
oh
Polyhedron, no
man,
one remembers that either. That was
it's
the
an amazing
RPGA's
magazine.
newsletter, monthly, right?
It was
Eventually.
quarterly at one point. Jean got it to monthly because she came in as a journalist. When Jean came to the RPGA Network, she was a newspaper journalist out of I want to say Evansville, Indiana, very tied up with the Galathricon crowd, and so amazing gamer. But she was a journalist before she was a gamer,
Mm.
so or before she was a pro gamer. But I'm sorry, where were we?
Well,
We're off track.
we were about to talk about Polyhedron.
Yes. The Polyhedron was the new zine of the Role Playing Game Association. The very first issue, I believe, is 1981. I know that Darlene did the cover of it. And from the very first issues, you had like interviews with Gary Gygax, and Frank Menser was editing the copy, and Bill Hoyer was making sure that the network stayed alive for years and years and years, and he was heavily involved in that. But it was a segment of TSR that was, by the time I got there, was rigidly in the public relations sector. But I think originally when Frank and Penny Williams were running the network, I think it was more of a still in the culture of game design and tournament design, because so much was associated with tournaments and the early Dungeons and Dragons products. I mean, almost all the early Dungeons and Dragons module products were tournaments that were run at Gen Con or other big conventions. And so I think I don't know how well that's studied in like the history books, the Petersons, the Appelkleins, but
Right.
tournament stuff is how it all got started. It was the fact that you could run an event over and over and over again. You could run that tournament round, that single adventure over and over and over again. Gave you a chance to get really good at first running that adventure, and second, finding all the spots in that adventure that you need to make improvements on. So
Yeah,
when you get a chance to play test something 1,000 times, like you could at Gen Con, you kind of know where the rough spots are.
it is. I mean,
That's a real
huge
advantage.
difference between even. And there was a period where most adventures weren't getting any playtesting to speak of. The ones that were getting published, but the RPGA stuff got play tested all the time. And like you
Constantly.
say, the earliest one of the reasons why the early D&D products, the early D&D adventures are so memorable is that they came out of just what you were describing, right? They had that thousands of iterations to get them ironed out and become what people recognize them as now.
And I think of them as being AD&D canon. Those original rounds, the slave pits, the giants. These are because many game players, many AD&D players have played them, or D&D players have played them. They are part of the culture of D&D, just like Greyhawk is, just like Forgotten Realms is, just like Dark Sun is, because it's a different place. And again, it's a place in our head. It's not necessarily a location, but it's a it's a different way of thinking about the role playing game. The role playing game was originally semi competitive, right? At least at Gen Con, this was the platform from which this was the platform that the Johnny Appleseed was dropping around behind him, right? Little Appleseed, oh, we've got our adventure here, adventure here. People start to play it. That's how people learned to run a game, because we didn't have YouTube back then. Nobody sat down and said, first, you roll initiative. Well, no, when we go through this, you had to pick up a book that was kind of complex and a little bit um, arcane in itself, almost intentionally arcane. And it was a little tricky to get started. But if you could watch somebody do it well, And going to Gen Con gave the opportunity to watch some people do it really well. And they weren't necessarily the pros. But you could see people who were like, this person has got it. This person made me laugh so hard for 4 hours. I don't care about the rest of the adventure, And sometimes when you go to a convention, it becomes about accomplishment. But my experience with the RPGA Network was, even though there were some competitive aspects, it was really all about the fellowship. It was really all about the friendship, which is more important and ultimately much longer lasting than any set of games. I'm friends with people, deep friends with people that I, haven't seen in, 30, 40 years. We get together online a little bit. I might get a chance to see them in person at Gen Con, wave at them while we're walking in
Hmm.
opposite directions in front of the dealer's room. Because I know you're quite busy at Gen Con, and I'm pretty tied up at a cash register at the Gen Con live auction. Gen Con live auction, if you guys if you've been to Gen Con, you've never been to the Gen Con live auction, you should go this year, because in the new space over at the Marriott, we have a much bigger um, um, shop, a place where you can come in and just buy stuff and walk out. There was a time when you had to stand in line to get in that shop when it was over across from the dealer's
Right.
hall.
Right.
We don't have that problem now. I mean, the space is big enough that the line that we had last year lasted the first 2 hours, and then after that, you could just walk right in. Put your bag in bag check, and then buy really cool stuff and walk out. And it was good for the sellers, and it was really good for the buyers, because it was a very well run auction last year. So if you've never been to the Gen Con live auction and you go to Gen Con, you should make some time to walk in there, because it's pretty impressive. And plus, at the collector's auction on Friday night, you're going to see stuff for sale that you've never ever even heard. I've got an item for sale this year that I've never ever seen sell before. So you never know, and it's the fun of Gen Con. But the problem with Gen Con is there's so many people, so many of us, that we'd like to be able to get together, but we're waving at each other in the hallway.
Yeah, I mean that's what things about Gen Con is. There's so much to do that it's impossible to do it all, right? And so, no matter what it is you do, that there are things that you necessarily are not doing. It, uh,
I revel in well, sometimes I'm just running a cash register, but someone brings a product in front of me, and I'm running it up, and I have to stop, and I'll ask the customer, "Do you mind if I just hold this for a second?" Because pieces of history stuff doesn't seem important, right? But as I'm starting to sell things, as I get older and get into the business of selling my old collectibles, um, it's somewhat emotional. It's a little more emotional than I expected.
yeah,
Digging through Dragon magazines, that was gruesome for me, because I had to dig through a bunch of old stuff to find everything and put them all in Ziploc bags and put them in order and grade them and get some idea of what I've got. But it was just going through the stack of them in the polyhedrons too. It just brought up so many memories of the games and the times that I was. It was deeply disturbing. I didn't expect it. On the other hand, it stimulated me to write this game that Craig and I have been working on.
uh, uh,
Let's see. I was at TSR for 2 years. Ran Was running Gen Con in '95 and '96, or running the Bruce Hall both of those years.
were you only at
And then,
TSR for 2 years?
oh yeah, I was with the network for 7 or 8, but I was only getting paid for the last two. That's the thing. We did a lot of volunteer time at Gen Con. So, and Winter Fantasy too. I always came up. That was my favorite event. Winter Fantasy was awesome. I have to start going again. But yeah, we were yeah. I worked '95 when the big issue was recertifying Living City characters and their magic items. That was
All
very
right,
fun.
so hold on. Actually, that's we're already getting close to an hour. Man, these things just fly by.
Well, I won't
Uh,
shut up. So I told you, it's a problem.
well, no, but you've crammed a lot into an hour. But Living City is another thing that the living campaigns,
Right.
starting with Living City, they were another new thing on top of. It built on the kind of um, the kind of events that we talked about earlier that
Well, we
RPGA
have the
would run.
marshaling strategy, so we can put a lot of people at a bunch of tables. Well, we don't have to have a pre-generated round, and so Gene Rabier, someone said, "Why don't we have a campaign?" And I'm sure that I think Harold advanced the idea originally
Harold
of the
Johnson.
Living City, but um, that you have an ongoing campaign in which players can bring an approved character, a character they've played before in a Living City game, acquire a certain amount of experience and/or magic items, and then play in another Living City game. So it's an ongoing campaign set in Raven's Bluff, which is a town in Faerun, generously donated by Ed Greenwood from Forgotten Realms. So it was donated to RPGA members. There's a similar space for the UK RPGA Network, but the name, I want to say Sarbrinar, um, but they had their own little living. It's an ongoing campaign. We take submissions for event tournaments just like we would for pre-generated rounds, but the events are all set inside of the Living City genre, the inside the rules that we had set up for those adventures, and then once you got that event approved by the network, you could run that event at your convention, or someone else could order it for their convention. So over time, there were, I think I understand Bill Barsh of Pacesetter has them all. I think it's what I've been told, is he has
Mm.
a collection of all the RPGA rounds, but there must be several thousand total adventures, and not all AD&D. Lots of Cthulhu, lots of paranoia, a lot of boot hill type stuff. So
Of
but the
all, of
majority,
yeah,
I think, is AD&D.
because RPGA originally was not just a D&D. Uh,
Originally, it was a D&D fan club, but I mean, when you're an industry leader, then it's cool to bring other folks in, and I don't think that Gary or Frank were shy about that at the very beginning. They had interest in being an industry leader and maintaining the industry organization, I think, is the way they viewed it. But I don't mean to be putting words in Frank's mouth. But it was a players organization. It was a chance for the players to have a say, and it was a good interface for TSR because they needed to know what their players wanted, and this gave them a paying audience that would give them information. And there was quite some time in which RPGA was doing playtesting. Say, for example, of the second edition AD&D game, RPGA Network clubs were doing playtesting, and that was one of the reasons I think people were excited about RPGA. Was like, oh, we get to be part of the creation of the game, or the refining of the game.
yeah, but RPGA over time became wholly. It went back to being just TSR Wizards and TSR centric later on in its existence.
When I was laid off in Christmas of 1996, which is a different story. They won't tell. I told that to Ben Riggs this year, but uh, when that happened, it was just about the time that TSR was getting ready to be purchased by Wizards of the Coast, and um, I'm sorry, I just went sideways for a second. I'm looking at your picture, and I'm trying to. What was the question we just talked about?
Well, I mean, we've kind of strayed around. It's a good point to kind of refocus because
Go
we
ahead.
so let's let's go back to Living City.
Go. Yeah.
So Living City was instead of the uh, what we were talking about earlier, where you've got pre-generated characters, or
Right.
you could, like in your home campaign, have your character. Now there were special rules and they had to be approved, but you could have your character and then advance them through playing at conventions,
Mm-hmm.
and it combined with RPGA in the same way that you had these same adventures that would be run multiple times
Right.
at at conventions all across the world.
Right. So, for example, if you saw an event that you played in at Gen Con and you wanted to run that event at your home convention, then you could order that round. And the RPGA was a ridiculously low cost organization. It was like $5 for a round or something like that. And we even sent out little prize certificates, on the mail order hobby shop. But you'd run the round as many times as you needed to, and then you'd send in the packets afterwards, and we'd take care of the scoring at HQ. But the 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 adventure where we had the characters have their own character, this became complicated because just like a home campaign gets complicated, that you want to make it interesting and it has to be challenging. If your players can sit down at a table and say they have any character they want or any magic item they want, then that unbalances the game, and so a game master wouldn't normally allow that to happen.
Right.
Um, and so you have to have rules inside of the ongoing campaign to prevent those sorts of disagreements. And when the game gets bigger, you have to certify everything because you can't just take people's word for it anymore. It it's an organization that's based on trust, but people are always trying to get an edge because it's a game, and we got min maxers, and that was the kind of thing that was happening inside of the tournaments, is that there was so much min maxing, it was taking HQ's time away from running the whole program and having to deal with a few bad apples that were kind of slowing the process down.
Tell you what, a thought I had in the last, well, I was going to say recently, but actually over the last couple of years, that um, one of our modern world advances of dubious good is whole NFTs and that functions. But one of the things I thought is that this is the this is a version of what would make running a living city uh, kind of living campaign easier, right? If there was
A,
that this whole way of
a
having a
birthmark.
exist in
Yeah,
exist in
a
digital
digital stamp of
space,
some
yeah,
kind.
and
and
that's what
and,
it
and
was.
the things that we went through, and I watched World of Warcraft evolve in real time as an online game, and I thought it was really funny that they went through the same kinds of things that we went through at the RPGA Network. Was at first it was all fair game, and then they realized, oh, we need to have some scaling here. Some players are taking advantage of our loopholes. Let's rethink this. And so even they went through a kind of a second version of their launch with the first game was a little overpowered. So, but the fun thing that the folks at RPGA were doing was that they were trying something that the game companies themselves didn't have any financial incentive to pursue. So TSR wants to sell stuff, so they don't want you to provide something that doesn't cost anything. And so the RPG Network, we were providing an entertainment of a sort that was basically convention related. The network we were selling a membership package which included a newsletter and a membership number which allowed you to acquire experience points of your own as a player or as a game master, or eventually they had service points, people who do nothing but volunteer or that
Hmm.
acquire points by being in service positions. And quite a large number of people are still around and doing that. As I said, the network shut down in 2008, but a lot of us are still around. So there's a little Facebook group that's kind of a private group, but we're trying to looking at recreating a group with that sort of background. There's some issues, is because especially trademarks and things of that nature. So I don't want to say too much except to say there are a group of us who are old RPGA folks who would love to see an organization like that represent players and gamers all over the country, because we don't really have an end user organization, right?
Right.
We have a game manufacturers organization, we have retailers organization, but when it comes to those of us who are actually buying and playing the games, nobody's really representing us.
It's true.
Well, that is, I have some. I was about to get into some personal preferences, and so I said I probably should not do that. So there are some game companies out there who are working very hard to be really terrific companies, and I'm so tickled in this market that some of these guys are working so hard. And so glad to see Mike Merrill's landing at Chaosium. I'm thinking, wow, lucky Chaosium.
Yeah.
So
All right. So we're right around an hour. I just want to. I try and keep these things between an hour and a half, just to be kind to you and
Sure.
kind to
Oh,
the
and I'm
poor
fine.
folks that are tuned in.
Sure.
So, um, why don't we take this opportunity for you to say a little bit about some of the things you're doing now that you
We had talked a little bit before. The things I'm doing now, I dropped out of gaming for a while because I wasn't being paid to do it, and it was like, wow. After being paid to do it for a while, I kind of took it personally when I wasn't being paid.
did?
So I went off and got into the computer business for a while, and that was did me fine. Um, but what happened after moved to New York and was there for 15 years, and when I came back, I started this business where I do science shows. I go out and I go to libraries and schools, and I do chemistry and physics and things of that nature, and have a blast doing that. But the as I moved back, because I have a child and a grandchild in this area, I've become associated with like the Gary Con movement. Which and when Gary Con, I think my very first Gary Con was Gary Con 4. So I was still living in New York at the point at which Gary passed, and then I'd moved back. But Gary Con was quite small, and it needed volunteers. And Harold was standing at the counter, and Harold's daughter was standing next to him, and I love those people, so I just offered to help. And so I started volunteering for Gary Con. And when we moved over to the the lodge, the Grand Geneva, I was volunteer coordinator that year, and it was amazing to see the numbers of people that could come in. First, if folks have never been to GaryCon before, you've probably heard this. It's a great convention, is a great convention, but there's a magical connection between the facility, the Grand Geneva Resort and Spa, and the folks that show up for that convention. The gamers really love those employees, and the employees of the resort and spa really love the gamers. Very few events I've ever been to, the gamers are treated that well. I mean, and it's Wisconsin, right? So if I'm sitting down at a table and I'm playing a game, I can order a steak sandwich and a beer, and they'll bring it to me
Mm.
in the hotel wherever I am. And I'm thinking, well, geez, how come conventions can't run like this? And it's a first class hotel with great food and great beer. So hey, it's a different experience for folks that if you haven't been to an amazing convention, then I think that you got to try that at least once, because it's totally the people who show up at GaryCon, the people who are behind the screen sometimes, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to buy Michael Mornard a beer. I guess that's not as exclusive as I thought it used to be. Uh, so yeah, I guess I was at TSR for 2 years, and then the Christmas layoff of 1996, and then came back. And these days, what I'm doing in Lake Geneva is first. Luke has been running GaryCon for a number of years, doing a great job. Doesn't need my help, although I showed up at Founders and Legends this last year. What a great convention! So much fun. It was small, but it had a lot of the same kind of vibe. And then this year. Heidi and Eric Gygax Garland have decided to celebrate Gary's birthday with an event in Lake Geneva on Gary's birthday. That's the 26th, 27th, and 28th of July. It's called Egg Con, EGG Con. And we're going to celebrate Gary's birthday by playing games, and it's already sold out. It's a running a game convention in July in Lake Geneva is kind of counterintuitive because everybody else is already in Lake Geneva, right?
Right.
So trying to be able to get the space, it was very cool an idea, and I'm glad to be a part of it. But that's happening this year. Never done that before, so that's very cool. And look for that because that'll get bigger. And then the other thing that I'm working towards that everybody can come to is an event
So are they
in
thinking about that being making this a regular thing?
I think Heidi and Eric just moved back to Lake Geneva. I think they're staking some territory here. That's my personal opinion.
All right.
But I think it's something they want to do. It's bold. I'm really impressed to do a gaming convention in Lake Geneva in the summertime. It's awesome. I think you know you just don't know how little there has been in terms of Dungeons and Dragons tourism available in Lake Geneva until the last couple of years. But then Dragon Days. So Paul Stormberg, who's involved with the Gygax Memorial Fund, has been helping to generate some buzz for an event called Dragon Days in Lake Geneva. It's going to be this year. It's going to be September 27th, 28th, and 29th. And Lake Geneva has become a walkable town for D&D tourism, but we've got a little Renaissance fair set up. Last year we had a blacksmith actually turning steel and showing the kids how to do it. We had a hay bale maze there was a dungeon that you had 4 dragons you had to defeat, and that was being run by Stormberg's children. And let me tell you, Paul Stormberg's children, really good gamers, very impressive gamers. I don't know what it is, but something in that family. They're just very strong gaming background. But then so many other events. But the idea is that we're kind of taking over the town of Lake Geneva for that weekend, which is magical because Lake Geneva has never trusted us with that responsibility before. Last year was an event zero, so that we tested all of the permits and made sure that all the vendors were happy and that the museum was happy and that Yolanda at 330 Center Street, the birthplace of D&D, was happy. And we had gaming at the Horticultural Hall and at the American Legion Hall, as we will again this year. Amazing. In Lake Geneva, getting a chance to play a game at Horticultural Hall or in the American Legion Hall, go out to beer, afterwards. And we haven't even begun to structure a whole Dragon Days After Dark. Right now we're just taking on the gaming events. But
Right.
well, I mean, the part of what we're doing is social. That's the whole reason that we're together, is because we have a good time when we're not at the gaming table. We look for excuses to get together and laugh.
Right.
Sometimes we roll dice.
Well, you know what? I had the hardest time go all the way back to the beginning of gaming and trying to explain to my parents what this thing was until it struck me. I was like, how on Friday nights you get together with the Schwartzes and the Danas and the Faust, and you play bridge, but you don't really play bridge. And sometimes it's like that. Only we do it every Friday, and we're playing this game. And they're like, "Oh, I still don't understand the game, but I understand that."
And I agree with your analysis. Your analogy is good. The only thing I would add is except the game is like a Rorschach test. Okay, so every
Yeah,
game every week it's like a Rorschach test. Every week, every character is a Rorschach test. So you get a chance to experiment. Like, how out there are you going to go this Sunday night?
yeah. No, they didn't. They never got the game, but they would always say, "Why do you want to play so much?" And that got them to understand why I liked the hobby.
Yeah, it's intrinsically uh, interesting. It's intrinsically motivating. You don't have to pay. No one has to pay me to play a D&D game. I'd be glad to play all day long for free. And as a matter of fact, that's how I prefer to do it, all day long for free. I think the thing I'm nervous about with the companies these days is the monetizing the game experience. I think it's very cool to have an app on your phone where you could do all the math and all the memory. That's very helpful, but it makes me nervous that I don't want to pay to play a Dungeons and Dragons game every time I sit down at the table. I don't even want to pay a tiny bit for it. I bought my books already. I have the characters already drawn up. I don't need the app, and so I would just rather roll dice and say hi. That's not saying that people shouldn't have the opportunity. I think it's very cool that mechanic, space saver, thinking saver is available for the folks who want to do it. I think it changes the game. I'm always going to be an old school, watch the movie, read the book kind of game master, and I'm not going to argue physics model with my players. I'm not
right.
going to tell them what the rules are. It's no fun.
All right. All right. I'm going to pause my drawing here and sort of shift my focus back to
Really,
you.
really good.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So this is about 45 minutes into the drawing. I'm going to finish it over the course of the week. People who are subscribed to our free newsletter, 50 years of dungeon.substack.com, get to see the finished version first. I finished last week's already. People who are subscribed have seen it. I'm not gonna. I think tomorrow I'm going to release it for folks to see. So if you want to see these things first, that's the place to be. There's also a paid version. People who pay get a process video at the end.
Mm-hmm.
This app I'm using will do a video that shows line by line the thing comes together for you. So they get to see that. And people who pay will also get extra discounts on merch that I plan to do. Oh, you know what? I don't talk about this. Sorry, I'm taking up your time with this. We're not going to do this little pitch in the middle of the show here. I also am doing art prints for these.
Cool.
Actually, and that's something I pitched from the beginning, and I've had some problems getting the prints done to my satisfaction. I think I've overcome that, and sometime in July, they should finally be easily available. The only people that can buy it are subscribers, even free subscribers. So it's not going to put it out for the world to buy. You got to be part of the club. But if you're a paid subscriber, you get a discount on buying those and maybe some other things I might be doing. Anyway,
Cool.
50 years in the dungeon.substack.com, which I'll say again at the end of the show. But let me take this off the screen. You know what? Before I go, I'll show you. This is how last week's turned out. I was doing the Book of Artifacts. Was the subject last time, and this is how the piece I was working on during last show finished up. So
I like it.
It turned out all right.
Yes, it did.
And weirdly, this is episode 22, which I can't believe already. The goal is for this to be a 50 weeks, 50 episodes for the 50 years in the dungeon.
Oh yeah,
I'm already thinking I'm not going to stop after 50. I'm having too much fun.
The 25th anniversary of Gen Con was 1991, wasn't it? Yeah. I was like, I've got this dice, the 25th anniversary dice. I want to say 2092 or 90. I don't go and play kind of it.
But I'm approaching halfway through this project, which is crazy. All right, so I'm going to take that off
build
screen.
That excitement. Gonna build that excitement.
You see all those down there. Look at all those drawings I've done, and we'll come back here to just you and me. All right, so let's segue into a little bit about that. The
stamps this year, August 1st. August 1st, the first date of issue for the Dungeons and Dragons stamp. Don't know if you discussed that with any other guests.
That hasn't come up. Let's say so. It's the 50th anniversary, and the U.S. Postal Service, if you don't know, Scott has just reminded us, is issuing Dungeons and Dragons U.S. postage stamps starting on August 1st, which happens to be in the middle of
Gen Con. It's crappy for me because I can't get any to the collector's auction unless I have somebody do this for me. I can't drive between Lake Geneva and attend the Gen Con auction on the same day because it's a rough drive. It's not an easy drive. So
right. So what you want to do, for people who don't know, who God, I'm blanking on that word again. The word for stamp collectors.
Philately.
Philately, yeah, philatelists.
We're gonna have some fun with that later on.
If you are not a philatelist, one of the things as a stamp collector that you want is the day that a postage stamp is issued, you take it down to a post office and have it stamped, have it registered with that date on it. It makes it more collectible. It makes it a more rarer collectible.
The concept is to get it canceled in Lake Geneva.
Well, that's the special.
That's the special because that's like that. That's only one day of being able to get those, and then they're never available again. And collectors are slaves to that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
Just don't tell them how many you got because it's like I have 99 watches in so it's very exciting. The whole thing it makes us feel so mainstream that we have a postage stamp that celebrates the 50th anniversary of the Dungeons and Dragons game, and it came hard these 50 years. It wasn't easy. The year that I left TSR, I wasn't sure that there was going to be a TSR anymore,
right?
Because I was laid off long before Wizards purchased the company, and so it was very uncertain. Magic: The Gathering, the aftermarket had sucked an awful lot of energy out of the retail purchasing market in 95 and 96, and made it challenging for companies who are doing great work. So what could you do?
It's weird. You know what? I might argue that. I think that what Magic did was create it. It stole a lot of the thunder at conventions, but
Agreed.
The problems that D&D was having in that era were not Magic was not causing those. It was an easy target for what was the culmination of the the way the business had been run without looking to the future. Um,
Yeah, I have no argument with it that it was a good product and that it was an appropriate product. I think it changed the way the convention looked,
yes, yeah,
because of the nature of it's a dueling sort of thing as opposed to a community sort of thing, and it's also a hyper competitive thing as opposed to a non-competitive thing, which is
right.
Dungeons and Dragons is non-competitive. So
But the
that's the
conventions were
concept.
not where sales were. I mean, a lot of sales happened at the convention, but that's not where the bulk of like that the conventions changing should not have impacted and doesn't impact the larger profitability of the product.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's not what
But
I
it's about
wanted to
engagement,
say.
though. It's about reaching your audience because you got
Yeah.
to be able to reach those people before they even know
Oh, I've
what you're
got
doing. So.
a long diatribe that I go on about how convention culture has shifted, and not whether it's good or bad, but that it's
Right.
not. A lot of people just don't recognize,
Evolution
or
is
newer
constant.
people don't understand, don't remember what conventions used to be compared to what they are now.
Hmm.
But having said that, to push that to the side too, and I'll go
Hmm.
back to this. D&D's the U.S. Postal Service is giving Dungeons and Dragons a series of stamps.
Hmm.
When we got into it, even when you were through the 90s when you were working on it, D&D was still very much a niche product, a niche culture. And it has, in the last 10 or 15 years, really blossomed to be something that is not just. Like I used to get, when I would say I worked on D&D, people would say to me, do people still play that? And now it's as big, it's bigger than it's ever been.
The
Cultural.
controversy is over. It used to be, is it a terrible thing or is it not a terrible thing? That was the framing actually.
Yeah.
And as the and my boss, the PR director of TSR, was desperately trying to let people know this is just a game that a lot of people play. Trying to be real nice about it, real straight about it, because the fact that the context of the game happened to be sword and sorcery just was incidental to the
Right.
to the process of the design of the game. But I what I wanted to say before we get off the air is that role playing is something I admonish my friends who think of role playing as just being a hobby, because we're involved in experimenting with just the concept of trust with each other,
Mm.
pretending, and that requires a little bit of trust, and making mistakes and stuff like that, and a little bit of structure is helpful. But I, where I think that role playing is going in the next few years is that people are going to realize that a human technology can be superior to a technical based technology, that is, say, a computer based or a AI based technology. I don't think an AI can run a good Dungeons and Dragons game. I'm not sure that we're ready for that, or it will be anytime soon. Um, it might surprise us, of course. We'll probably have AI comics and stuff like that that'll be very funny. But I think that the human contact between you and I,
Mm.
between me and the Bingles and the Frecks and the people I used to play games with, these are friendships that don't go away. They're in my head forever,
Right. Right.
and Don and I contact each other all the time on Facebook. So even though we haven't seen each other in 20 years, we have memories. We spent time around a table together we're never going to forget.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
It's
we
a
shared that with.
socialization that there is less and less of in the modern world. I mean, one of
Well,
the things.
and
Go ahead.
without the little device in front of us, because
Right.
you and we've got a device in front of us. But when we're sitting at a table at a game convention and we've got our Coke and our character sheet, and we're ready to have a good time, we hear all this noise, we can barely hear each other. There's a lot of joy in that. We gotta wanna you gotta wanna be there. Gotta wanna be there.
One I thought you might have been about to say, and I'm guessing you probably will agree with this, that one of the things about role playing is it's about, at its heart, it's about practicing empathy, right? Because you are creating a character that is not you, and you're thinking about how that person thinks in a way that you would. It's not real. It's not a situation you would ever encounter. Now,
The whole concept of, for example, if you take a first the original Dungeons and Dragons game, you don't have a lot of character choices. You know, you have an elf, you have a hobbit, you have a wizard, and these limited choices allow you to choose an archetype and then take on the character. When you give so many choices, it becomes difficult to focus in on the few choices you have. So there is an elegance in having a very simple, streamlined game, you
mhm.
know. And when you have that opportunity, you can rely on. You don't have to. You don't have to fight so hard. You don't have to. You don't have to win. The biggest problem that I find with players these days, and it's not their problem. It's our society's problem, is that players these days play like American human beings. They don't play like high fantasy, you know, uh,
Character.
performers. They
Yeah.
don't play like Conan. They don't play like um, uh, uh, Gandalf. They don't have high minded goals. They're all about gathering stuff and winning this adventure. And it's like, what fun is that? If you didn't get your character killed a couple times, how fun is that? I mean, you know, my brother killed my character 3 times before I finally disappeared out of the portable hole. You know, didn't everybody else's? This is the thing. I thought everybody's life was like that, right? You know, you didn't have a character that just kept dying over and over again, and there's nothing you could do about it. Just you tried your best, but still, you know, yeah. What can you do?
All right. You know what? That's a good place, I think,
Well, thank
to
you for inviting me to
do it.
spend time with
Oh,
you, and
thank you.
I look forward to having a different time. We need to see each other face to face. You need to come have breakfast with me at Gen Con, and Harold and I always eat breakfast at the same place at Gen Con. So it's a secret, but
Okay.
I'll let
All
you know
right.
about it.
Well, the
So
next time at Gen Con, I will ask.
yeah, there you go.
Um, is there? You want to give another go at the events you've got coming up that people should look into?
Sure. I'd like to mention Egg Con. So that's Gary Gygax's birthday. That's an event being run by the Gygax Garlands in Lake Geneva. That's the weekend of July 26th, 27th, and 28th. 27th is Gary Gygax's birthday, and we're going to spank him, although he's not around for us to actually, you know what I mean. And then in September, Dragon Days, Lake Geneva Dragon Days on Facebook. You can find it there. It's an amazing event. We last year we only had 400 people, but we did no advertising whatsoever. This year we're going to do a fair amount of marketing, and we're expecting a couple thousand people to show up at Lake Geneva and kind of take over downtown for a little bit of game. The fun part last year is many people brought their children, and so we're able to put their children into a validating situation where the parents go, oh, I'm really glad that we're involved in this fantasy stuff because my kids get a chance to feel it, you know, that they feel safe and they feel, you know, that they're growing and they're outside of their experience, they're outside of their normal experience. And that's what you hope to be able to bring your kid, your grandkid to, a fun event that takes them out of their normal range. That's
So
safe, that
that's
keeps
in
them safe.
October, you say?
September 27th, 28th, and 29th. This is going to be Dragon Days 1, which means, and I guarantee you by year 4 or 5, it's going to be hard to get in town that weekend. So it'd be a good year to come when you can still get in. And I'm not bragging or making. I'm just saying the things that have happened in Lake Geneva D&D tourism. It's time. You know, D&D Cooperstown is baseball's home. Well, we
Yeah.
know where D&D was invented. It was invented at 330 Center Street in Lake Geneva, and we're going to celebrate that. People walk by it every day. The lady who owns it is so sweet to these people. So as long as everybody's respectful, then we'll have a really good time, and Lake Geneva is going to love us more than they did before. So
All right. Well, is there somewhere that people can reach out to you or should look for you online?
yeah, I'm at oh geez, I guess I'm on Facebook under my name, Scott Douglas, and the recumbent strategist is the business name that I'm been taking on as I sell stuff and start to have these conversations more and more. The recumbent strategist at gmail.com. Um, so nice to talk to you, man.
You too,
We
man.
got we
So
got to sit and
hold on. I'm
yeah.
gonna do an outro, and then you and I can
Oh well,
chat
good. Geez,
for
yeah,
another
yeah.
couple of seconds.
Sure, sure.
All right. But thank you very much for coming on.
Glad to help.
All right. So there was Scott Douglas. He told me before we went on that I would have trouble uh, getting him to stop talking. I did not find that to be the case. I found he had just the right amount to say, and I didn't find it that hard to every once in a while kind of guide him back where I wanted to go. I think that was a fun. I'm going to have a lot of fun rewatching this episode. Thank you for tuning in. Always appreciate you. If you've been in the chat here, I haven't. I tell you the one thing: we've been talking so much and so quickly. I haven't interacted with the chat. Thank you to Kathy Carmichael and Craig Patillo, who Scott said was one of his friends. The Lady Lime, Jason Presson, Becky was here. Becky Meyer was here for a little while. Linnea dropped in, and James Thomas. I know we've had a bunch of other people who haven't put a comment in, which is A-okay. You don't need to do that. If you're watching on replay, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a comment in whatever platform you're watching this on. That certainly helps with those whole dreaded algorithm things. Give a like, give a thumbs up, whatever it is that the platform you're watching on has. It helps. They tell you, and I make a point of this. The reason I ask is not so that I feel better about me, though I kind of do. The reason is that it helps the site that you're watching on know that this is the kind of thing that other people may like. It helps us to get it shown to other people and bring more people in to enjoy the fun with us. So again, please, if you would, sign up for our free newsletter, 50yearsinthe.dungeon.substack.com. You get all the news about what's coming up. You'll be the first ones to see the art when it's finished, and you'll get discounts on the merch that I will be producing here for the show. I will be back next week with a different guest. Off the top of my head, I don't remember who it is, but it's certainly to be someone fun. It's certain to be someone fun. And I will be back tomorrow evening with another episode of my improv cartooning show, Random Encounters. So wherever you're watching this, look for that if you like this kind of thing. I'll be drawing, randomly rolling up who and a what, and then I draw a cartoon of it. It's a lot of fun. If you haven't seen it, please join me. So until next week, thank you for coming, and I'll see you then. Bye.